Hello everyone, back again with movie and tune recap. Today, I'm going to explain a Canadian supernatural horror film from 2019, titled Z. Spoilers ahead, so watch out and take care. The movie begins with a family of three: Kevin Parsons, his wife Elizabeth, and their 8-year-old son, Josh. Each day, Josh is usually driven to school by Georgia, Elizabeth's friend, along with her son, Daniel, and at school, Josh is quiet and keeps to himself, avoiding activities and other students. One day, Kevin and Elizabeth learn that Josh has an imaginary friend named Z, and Josh even tells them that Z is happy to meet them. Over time, Josh's behavior starts to change. He gets into a fight with Daniel, leading to Elizabeth having to drive him to school herself. At home, Elizabeth noticed something strange in Josh's closet, but it turns out to be one of his toys. As time goes on, Z seems to influence Josh in unsettling ways, and his behavior worsens, harming other children at school, which results in his indefinite suspension. Elizabeth also discovers that Kevin had been signing Josh disciplinary slips without telling her, hiding the extent of Josh's growing problems. Worried about Josh, Elizabeth and Kevin take him to see their family therapist, Dr. Seeger. The therapist suggests that they can help Josh by encouraging him to make new friends and by spending more time playing with him. However, as they prepare to leave, Dr. Seeger becomes concerned when he learns that Josh's imaginary friend is named Z. That night, Elizabeth is awakened by strange noises coming from Josh's room and curious, she goes to check on him but finds his bed empty. As she searches the house, she discovers the refrigerator door wide open and then, she is startled by Josh. The next day, Elizabeth takes Josh to a children's activity center called Play Zone, and while Josh plays on the slide, Elizabeth has a chilling vision of Z following him.
Josh! I got you!
Back at home, she tells Kevin about what she saw, but Kevin dismisses her claim, insisting that Z isn't real, and this frustrates Elizabeth. The following day, Elizabeth visits her late mother's house to tend to her belongings with her troubled sister, Jenna. While sorting through old items, Elizabeth finds an old electronic alphabet toy that repeatedly says the letter Z, and strangely, it stops as soon as Elizabeth picks it up. Feeling isolated and unable to arrange a playdate for Josh, Elizabeth along with her son, visits her friend Georgia to ask why Daniel is avoiding Josh. As the two women talk, they are suddenly interrupted when Daniel falls violently from an upstairs railing. Panicked, both mothers rush to help him, but Elizabeth looks up and sees Josh standing at the top of the stairs, completely emotionless. Paramedics arrive and rush Daniel to the hospital, leaving Georgia distraught and furious. She tells Elizabeth and Josh to leave her home and never come back. With the situation spiraling out of control, Elizabeth decides to take drastic action, and the following morning, she drugs Josh's milk while preparing breakfast. When she goes to his room to call him, she is startled to find a large mural of a creature drawn by Josh on his bedroom wall, which he identifies as Z. At first, Josh refused to drink the milk, saying that Z told him not to. However, Elizabeth reassures him that there's nothing wrong with it and reluctantly, Josh complies. Later, while packing up items in her late mother's house, Elizabeth finds Josh standing in a room, staring at the ceiling fan, and concerned, she tells him he shouldn't be in there and sends him away. While going through her mother's belongings, Elizabeth discovers an old VHS tape containing home movies, and curious, she watches the footage and is horrified to see herself as a little girl playing with an imaginary friend named Z. Disturbed by the revelation, she burns the tape, and as the flames consume it, Elizabeth is startled by a mysterious noise from the woods. The next day, Kevin paints over the frightening mural of Z on Josh's bedroom wall, and meanwhile, Elizabeth continues to secretly drug Josh milk to keep him calm. However, the drugs start to take a toll on his health, and Josh suddenly starts to vomit. When Kevin finds out that Elizabeth has been drugging Josh without telling him, he becomes furious and the discovery sparks a heated argument between the couple. That night, after tucking Josh into bed, Elizabeth hears the alphabet toy from her mother's house repeating the letter Z over and over. Moments later, the toy begins calling out random letters, Elizabeth writes down the sequence of letters and discovers they spell out the chilling message, "Imagine Z." While taking a bath, Elizabeth begins thinking about Z, and out of desperation, tries to summon him, and to her horror, Z suddenly manifests briefly before vanishing. Terrified, Elizabeth screams, and Kevin rushed to her side, and frightened, she tells Kevin that Z is real and reveals he was once her imaginary friend too. The next day, Elizabeth visits her late mother's house again and meets her troubled sister, Jenna, who is overwhelmed with guilt for not being there for their mother before she died. After comforting Jenna, Elizabeth notices something carved into an old piece of wood, "Elizabeth plus Z forever." Fearing for her own life, Elizabeth revisits Dr. Seeger, and the therapist retrieves Elizabeth's childhood patient file and recounts how her terrified father brought her to therapy when she was the same age as Josh. Dr. Seeger plays an old recording where young Elizabeth proudly declares her intention to be with Z forever, and Dr. Seeger tells Elizabeth he believes Z is now using Josh as a way to reconnect with her. Meanwhile, back at home, Kevin notices that the mural of Z on Josh's bedroom wall has inexplicably reappeared, and suddenly, the electronic alphabet toy begins repeating the letter Z again. The sound abruptly stops when Kevin picks up the toy, and just as he prepares to leave the room, all the toys in the room begin to flicker with lights. Suddenly, Z attacks Kevin, leaving him with no chance to escape. On her way home, Elizabeth tries calling Kevin, but he is not answering, and when she arrives, she is horrified to find the house engulfed in flames. Panicked, she rushes inside and is startled by Kevin's lifeless body falling in from the ceiling. Elizabeth manages to locate Josh, but before she can save him, Z drags him into another room. In a moment of desperation, Elizabeth pledges to devote herself entirely to Z in exchange for being allowed to leave the burning house with Josh. Elizabeth takes Josh to stay with Jenna, and give her sister money to take care of his needs. Meanwhile, Elizabeth isolates herself in her late mother's house, fully surrendering to Z control, and she regresses into a subservient relationship with him, cooking meals and even sharing a bed with the unseen entity. Whenever Elizabeth fails to meet Z's expectations, like not preparing his food properly, he becomes enraged. One day, Dr. Seeger visits Elizabeth at her mother's house and is alarmed by her deteriorating state. He tries to reason with her, insisting that Z isn't real and that she created him in her mind as a child to cope with trauma. Despite his efforts, Elizabeth remains unconvinced, and tells Seeger to leave after catching a glimpse of Z behind him. After the therapist leaves, Elizabeth boards up the windows and doors, cutting herself off from the outside world to remain fully isolated with Z. One night while lying in bed, Elizabeth uses her phone in secret, but when Z enters the room, she quickly hides it, and the next morning, she discovers the phone smashed to pieces. During a game of hide-and-seek with Z, Elizabeth has a terrifying vision of her deceased father hanging from a noose on the bedroom ceiling fan. The following day, Elizabeth wakes up to find her wedding dress laid out for her. She puts it on and participates in a mock marriage ceremony with Z, cementing her submissive role in their twisted relationship. Later, Elizabeth tries to speak to Josh through Jenna over the phone, and when Z finds out, he angrily breaks out of the house to go after Josh. Realizing the danger, Elizabeth frantically warns Jenna, urging her to take Josh and leave the house immediately. However, Jenna can't find him anywhere. While still on the phone with Elizabeth, Jenna finally spots Josh playing on train tracks outside, completely unaware of an approaching train. Elizabeth listens in horror as Jenna tries desperately to save him, leaving her panicked and desperate for her son's safety. Shortly after, Dr. Seeger returns to the house accompanied by 2 police officers, but Elizabeth shut the door to prevent them from coming inside. Standing outside, he pleads with Elizabeth, insisting that she can control Z because she created him. However, she remains unresponsive. Moments later, the officers break down the door and are horrified to find Elizabeth hanging from a noose tied to the ceiling fan, and Josh, who had been in danger earlier, is found unharmed. Miraculously, Elizabeth survives the suicide attempt but is left in a catatonic state, and Jenna steps in to care for both her sister and her nephew. Later in the night, as Jenna tucks Josh into bed, He quietly says goodnight to Z before drifting off to sleep, and the movie concludes. Okay guys, that's all the recap about Z from 2019. Thanks for watching, see you again in the next video.